at what age do you start talking to your kids about, race and inequality, and like, how do you go about that? And maybe we don't know the answers, but I was just curious on that. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Pastor Steve, you want to go ahead?
He raised his hand.
I raised my hand, haha. We are, Becca and I are in an oddly unique position as pastors and as chaplains of our school. And we have this place where we get to interact and connect and pour into the lives of kids and students and parents and families of all kinds of different races and cultures and backgrounds, and we get to do things like go on missions trips and take our kids to see the world beyond our world. And so from a pretty young age, we've had the incredible blessing and opportunity of at least attempting to open our kids' eyes and give them a different worldview than others may have. They've been to Inuit villages in Alaska where poverty is beyond anything we can comprehend here, and as bad as I've seen in any third world country. They've been to the deep inner city and handed out food packages to people of all different backgrounds and colors. And they've interacted and played with kids, without any holdback, who did not look like them. And so on one side, we've had these conversations from the beginning, but at the same time, they're ongoing. And like I said, I'm still learning. I had to come to terms with, for me, what the rallying cry Black Lives Matter means, and why that's important, and why it is vital to say those words and proclaim those words, especially right now in our society and history. We were in California last week, and I shared this last weekend. We saw 2 protests on the same day. Very different spirit, very different feel, very different vibe. And we got to have a conversation with our kids about it because it happened right in front of us, and we were essentially in the crowd of these 2 groups. Now, one of them we separated from because it was not the kind of group that we wanted to be a part of. Well, the first one was 500 people gathered together and doing this the way it's supposed to be done. Peaceful protest, crying out the names of those who have been murdered, crying out Black Lives Matter, 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence, and peacefully, objectively, purposefully, intentionally protesting. There were police around, and the protesters, for the most part, were like high-fiving them and fist bumping them, and it was just such a joy to witness this moment. 12 hours later, almost midnight, this very small group gathered and were blocking traffic, and I understand the purpose of the blocking of traffic to show people how it feels to be powerless. But this group that was there, a very small group, maybe 40 people at 11 o'clock at night, the belligerence, the intensity, the anger, it was more of a what are you going to do about it kind of attitude. And almost like they were hoping to pick a fight than try to make a difference. And so we talked about that. We talked about, how can we support, and what are some things that we can do to let our voices be heard in this? Because it needs to be the right movement, the right way. Now I know that sometimes people just get angry and they don't know how else to respond. And that's why, you hear the words, riots are the voice of the powerless, because sometimes that's the only way they know to speak out. But that for me, that's been just some of the conversations we've been having with our kids in just these last few weeks, and in their lives.
Is there because you have a 10-year-old or close to 10-year-old kid, and do you feel like is that too young, or do you feel like
I don't think any age is too young. We've never pulled punches with our kids.
Mhm.
We've always had very practical conversations with them when the need arose. We don't necessarily bring things up that they don't need to know about at the age that they're at, but when something is happening and their little brains are trying to process it, you have to talk it out with them. You have to have a conversation. You cannot shield them
Mhm.
from the world and what's happening around them. They see the news. They hear their friends talking. I hear my kids in there right now yelling on Fortnite, right? And half the kids, I mean, they're in there,
Yeah.
and they're not black and white and brown and red and yellow, and they're just a bunch of goofy kids on Fortnite yelling at each other, bagging on each other and having a good time. And it doesn't matter what color they are in there, because they're all just shooting each other up anyway. Okay. So it does. So for kids, they need to have the chance to process, but if you don't give them the chance to process,
Yeah.
then they'll never get the opportunity to begin to actually formulate intelligent ideas of their own. They have to have that chance starting as young as possible. And you bring it to their age, but at the same time, you got to have that talk.
Yeah, it's good.
I think for us, we started having conversations very early on. We do travel a lot. We're natives of Chicago, and I was born and raised in inner city. However, my younger two have always lived in the suburbs. But we've traveled throughout the city using public transportation. Chicago is very diverse with a lot of silos, making sure we visit those different areas so they can see varying differences in race. Specifically having the race conversation, maybe about 7 or 8, especially with our son. Unfortunately, because you have to have a conversation about police officers, right? And how do you have that conversation with a 7-year-old without breaking his innocence? Having conversations with the daughter as well, but the male is from a different perspective, and being able to answer his questions as to why. If the police stop you, this is what it is that I need you to do, right? This is how I need you to respond, and this is safety for your life. There's no way of skating around it and having cute conversations, because it's really about life. And of course, children are very inquisitive, and we had to be very direct and specific, not only with police, but considering that we're here in Henderson now. Mm-hmm. We've already started having conversations with him about dating, how that looks, how someone of a different race might say, yes, okay, I like you. However, when a family member or a friend finds out, that might put you in a very different situation. We have 3 older children who don't live in the home, and one of our oldest sons have experienced that. Dating a young lady, had a disagreement, and the first thing she did was call the police. Of course, when the police got there, you're in one of those situations. So having conversations for us directly maybe started about 7 or 8. And they continue even along simple things of, son, I need you to take your hood off your head. Mm-hmm. And being a young boy, hoodies are what they do, right? They like to put the hood on their head and walk around. Mm-hmm. But having to have a direct conversation with him about, it's my freedom of choice. Why can't I? We have to have those. It's a matter of safety. I respect that. Yes, you should be able to, but the world that we live in, it's just something that you can't do. So in our household, it's something that we continue to have conversations about, because it's about safety.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just open up on a little bit of my life. So I think my mom never really thought about that conversation, and she immigrated from India, and so she never thought about, like, for example, if I got pulled over, that like just giving me the proper instructions on just to be safe, and even if you get a ticket that you don't believe is right, just being safe and getting home, and we'll worry about that later, right? But I never had that conversation. I never had the conversation of don't make like sudden movements. And going back to what Pastor Steve shared earlier about, him being a chaplain and really understanding that these guys also face like the worst of the worst people sometimes, maybe a lot of times, and so I just want to commend you for having that conversation, because and this is nothing against my mom, she just didn't know that she needed to have a conversation like that. She probably didn't even know like that probably existed in the world, immigrating from a different country. But I think like part of me, even though she didn't know that, part of me felt like I wasn't equipped for when I did get pulled over, and the police officer was hostile, because of maybe some of the movements, me reaching for my license and registration instead of him asking me to. I wasn't equipped to prepare myself for that moment, and so I do think having those conversations, Karen, I think is really, really important. I just want to commend you for that. As someone who didn't get that conversation,
Mhm.
I would rather have an awkward conversation than to make a not know about how to go about it when
Mhm.
it does happen. So
You know, a recent conversation we had with our son about the police, because he commented, if something ever happened to me, I'm not calling the police.
mm,
Tell me more about that. If something happens to me, I'm going to call either you or dad, my nanny, which is his grandmother, or his godmother, and then I'll call the police. And that was very hurtful as he unpacked his rationale behind, if I call the police, something might happen to me. So now it's at a different level where you have a 12-year-old walking around in fear. And then having to circle back around and have a conversation about humanity with son, all police officers are not bad.
right.
Um, all people of different colors are not bad. And if something happens, I need you to call the police. And then we give him his steps. And then you call mom and dad. But for us to be in a society where you have a 12-year-old that in kindergarten you teach, if there's an emergency, you dial 911. This emergency is, I'm going to call my parents, my godmother or my grandmother, and then I'll call the police. So it's happening, and it's been happening. And as a church and as a people, to begin to have those conversations. I recognize that there is a difference from perspectives and shoes that we sit in. That's fair. And that's a part of it. Let's start having those conversations. Let's educate. Let's open our understanding and listen and hear and make some changes in our heart. It really starts with the heart.
Yeah.
It's a heart change. And then raising that awareness. And once we're aware, then to be able to make that next step to do something different.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's uncomfortable.
It is. I'm sure it is.
It's very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable as African Americans to have conversations with young children. As we sit down and have conversations, just normalize the process. This is very different. We're navigating uncharted waters, and with that comes being uncomfortable. But let's be truthful with you. Let's be truthful with ourselves and honest with ourselves. And as we are honest, we know exactly what we're working with or dealing with, and then we have conversations of resolution of how we move forward. But it starts with an awareness and acknowledgement to collectively move together, but we can no longer sit and not have conversations about it.
Yeah.
I
And
saw an interview And the guy who's being interviewed said, you know, so many people are talking about racial reconciliation. And he said, that implies that there has been a conciliation. And at this point, I think our nation is still in the conciliation stage. That reconciliation means that there was previously peace and equality that somehow was fallen away and has to be brought back to that point. And this has been an ongoing problem and process in the history of our nation. The fact that even the Constitution of the United States, in the initial writing, considered Black people as 3/5 of a human being, shows us that reconciliation is not what we're looking for. It is conciliation. We are working towards peace, working towards, for the first time, equality and unity and togetherness. And honestly, looking at all this, as difficult as it is, this time that we are in, the situations that we're facing, I am beyond excited for what I feel like God is doing right now. Historically, this is where revival starts. This is where the move of God begins, is in these types of moments of difficulty, because then people are turning to God like never before. And I can't wait to see what God does as we work towards conciliation with one another and with Him.
Mr. and Mrs. Rowling, you have kids that are both probably, with all these parents have multiple kids. You probably have the youngest out of all these parents. And so is it something that like you guys sat down and talked with your kids about, or is it something like they came to you, or have you guys had conversations with your kids?
I think it's just part of our lives. It's part of our conversations, you know, like with Eric's family, even just within on his part of the family, there are 3 out of the 4 children that grew up in his house that are in interracial relationships. So we have half Black, half Asian, half Mexican, half Croatian. Like we've got all of this different mix. And so our kids grow up with it, but there'll be moments that come up, and you know, they're always God moments or Holy Spirit moments where we can kind of point out and make it a teaching moment so that they can see that, well, not everybody's family is like ours. Not everybody treats other people that look differently like ours does. And so, yes, it's a blessing that they maybe not have to worry about it or haven't had to worry about it yet. But it's not lost on us that we need to point out as they continue to grow and mature that it's something that they need to be conscious of and be able to listen to other people's stories, because other people's perspectives and walks aren't theirs. And we see that more now, obviously now with everything going on following the George Floyd incident or murder.
We're also lucky too. I mean, simple things like my little boy's basketball team was just a beautiful mix of people, you know? And so we don't even have to say things, you know, like Karen was sharing, she has to share things. You know, I wore a hoodie growing up all throughout high school. I never thought about any of the things I'm sure her, you know, she's trying to explain to her son, but we're very blessed in a sense that, you know, our kids are learning on their own because they're on these teams or they're in these, you know, classes where there are a good mix of people. Even our graduation that we just had last Friday, it's a great mix of people, and we were all together just having a good time. And so even though I don't, you know, understand, you know, a lot of, you know, what is exactly going on and the struggles that people have had to go through, we're very lucky that our kids are really just growing up with everybody. You know, that's what it feels like. I mean, everybody on that basketball team that I'm thinking of right now they're all buddies, and it does not matter what they are. You know?
Yeah. Pastor Michelle and Gary, you know, your boys are, you know, you have a boy that just graduated high school valedictorian. We're so proud of Colin. And so, and then you have a sophomore in high school. And
pray for us. Just pray for us.
And so it's interesting because, you know, them, you know, their mom and dad being an interracial couple, they're not only, you know, Filipino, but they're also white, you know. So, and then we're in this mix, this middle of this like racial divide where, like, you know, it feels like you're, you know, and this is unfair, but it feels like you're either one side or you're totally against it. Like, how have you guys like navigated that? You know, I'm sure they're on social media, so I'm sure they are hearing all kinds of stuff already about things. Yeah, how have you guys just navigated that?
I'll start out. Some of it started really, really early, and not in the context of white or black. It started out really early when I realized we're having kids, and I don't know a thing about what to teach them. Like, just that whole depravity, and so we sought out some of the resources and parenting through the church. And in that course of doing that, you know, there was a lot of discussion about respect for others, respect for authority, respect for other people's property. And so it all started with kind of a foundation of a biblical worldview of how do you respect other people being made in God's image. And so it started with that foundation, and then you actually have to take that and do it as an application. Like, you have to apply all that in the context and how you treat other people. And honestly, our kids follow our feet more than they follow our words. So a lot of it has to do with how we're interacting with other people. Now, in my family is traditional, is all, you know, is we're white and haven't been exposed to a lot of interracial things. So Michelle and I, and with her dad,
being adopted, yeah,
being adopted, if you want to get into that, like, we've been around in our lifetime, we've done a lot of traveling, we've been around a lot of variety of people, and really it starts with that respect and understanding that they're made in God's image, and we have to do our best to treat them as we'd want to be treated. Specifically when it comes to this conversation, you know, their response, from what I can see, was being appalled about a human being treated that way. And I will say that the discussion about having empathy, for example, and I can't possibly walk in Karen's shoes in her lifetime of experience and what that means, right? But I can have empathy for my sister and brother who are dealing with things I can't even imagine. Right? I haven't had to deal with. And we're called as one body to be able to grieve with those who grieve. And so that's been an exercise in faith for me personally, to try to like put some context around that in a real way and understand that and have a greater empathy and a greater, how do you support our brother and sister?
yeah.
So that's kind of been the discussion, at least from my point of view.
Yeah. Well, for me, like we were saying, I was adopted, and most people don't know, but my dad was Black. He was everything under the sun, but he, you know, identified himself as a Black male. And my adopted mom was Filipino. And being raised in that household, from my dad's point of view, he never talked about it. You know, he just always said, you treat the person, every single person, as equal. You treat them for the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And he led that example for me. He treated the person that was the janitor to the CEO of a company or the president of the United States. You respect the person, period. You don't have to like them. You really don't have to accept them. And you don't have to really support their opinions or their views, but you have to respect them and treat them as an equal and have listening ears to learn from each other. And so I was brought up with that just lived out through my father and through my grandparents. And with our kids, we just never said, okay, you're Filipino and you're white. We just have always said, you're a Kaloran. That's your identity. You know, you're God first. And this is what we do in our household. We treat everyone with respect, and we treat everyone with looking at their heart, always treating someone with that they are good, that they are valued, and that they need to be acknowledged. And I think a lot of it, as Karen was talking about, is life experiences. You know, I mean, Gary and I, we've gone through a lot as a family and as a couple, and age appropriate, you know. It's funny because sometimes our kids teach us things that we don't even know. You know, our kids are like inclusive. Everyone's inclusive. So if they're going to have a party, they're going to invite the whole world to our house for a party, and it doesn't really matter. You know, they don't view people. Their best friends are, you know, mixed. If you really think about it, you know, we were going through their friends, and there's not like, okay, they don't identify, well, this is my white friend, and this is this person's name, or this is my black friend, and this is their name. This is my friend, and I love them. And they may be mad, or we're disagreeing, or whatever, but it's never a color thing. And call me optimistic, call me naive, call me ignorant, or whatever. But if we can live our life like that and teach our kids how to live our life like that, that's where the humanity comes in. And that's where race has no segregation. It just is. It's all the same. And it starts at home, and it starts with our heart, and it starts teaching our children how to just be respectful and to love each other. That's the command, right? We are to love each other no matter what. You know, I'll still fight. I still fight with him. I still fight with you. I still, you know, but at the end of the day, you know, it comes to mutual respect and love.
Yeah, I've been really trying to follow the aspect of being slow to make my point heard and quick to listening to someone else's pain. You know, and I've just really been trying to do that. I think this time just showing empathy and showing compassion is more the forefront of what my focus is than anything else. And so I just really hear that heart. You know, I've, you know, Colin and I are pretty close, and Brennan as well, especially with Colin, you know, with Friday happening and graduation. And Katie actually makes fun of me because there were 2 nights this week where I actually spent the night at the Clorens. And so she had to remind me that I'm a 32-year-old spending the night at an 18 and 15-year-old's house. And so
It's our fourth son, by the way.
So
I mean, never spent that in my house, man.
So but it's interesting because Colin, you know, and I would say Brennan too, but just talking with Colin about things, like it's almost like his mind is so innocent that like I don't want to like tell him how I'm going through, right? Like I don't, you know, I don't want to like make him think like the world can be like this, you know, because he looks at it with such a pure heart, you know.